You've heard this before. Things just happened. Or maybe it wasn't the right time. There's also the classic, I'm confused. Words spoken with an almost poetic sigh, as if the universe had written the story for them. And now there was no choice but to watch, resigned, as he walks away. But what if I told you that chance deep down is just a well-packaged excuse? Jean-Paul Sartre invites us to face this uncomfortable idea squarely. The human being is not the result of chance. We make ourselves into being. With every choice, every silence, every gesture withheld, we are affirming the kind of person we decide to be in the world. It's not the universe revealing itself. It's us who, in each act, reveal what we are choosing to be. So when a man says he doesn't know what he feels, it's not that he's lost in some existential labyrinth from which he can't escape. It's possible that he's simply refusing to look at his own freedom. Because confronting freedom is frightening. It means, admitting he could have done differently. That he could have stayed, explained, risked, loved. But he didn't want to. And that changes everything. Sartre calls this bad faith. Bad faith is the lie we tell ourselves to avoid facing the anguish of choice. And in the male world, that bad faith can take the form of eternal immaturity, chronic indecision, or even a strategic silence. Because pretending you have no choice is a way of escaping responsibility, the weighty freedom you possess. If you believe everything happens by chance, you are absolving him of the burden of being free, and you're taking away from yourself the power to realize he is choosing all the time. He chose not to answer you. He chose not to commit. He chose not to look you in the eyes when you spoke seriously. And even if he says it wasn't intentional, Sartre reminds us, we are responsible even for our omissions. Freedom is not just what we do with our hands. It's also what we choose not to do, which reveals us entirely. The problem with believing in chance is that it spares us the pain of accepting that the other is, yes, making choices. But it also robs us of the possibility of choosing back. Because if everything is the work of destiny, you have no agency. But if everything is choice, then you can decide when to leave the scene, when to stop being carried away by his fog of confusion, when to stop waiting for him to become someone he has already decided not to be. Chance is a beautiful excuse. It comforts, lulls, and invites you to wait. But Sartre would say, there are no excuses, only choices, and the radical confrontation with what we choose to be. Perhaps you've already asked yourself, why does he act so contradictory? One day he's affectionate, the next he seems indifferent. He says he wants something serious, but lives as if he's running away from any depth. It's easy to think he's confused. But Sartre offers us another lens. He's not an enigma to be deciphered. He's a work in progress. In existentialist philosophy, the human being is not born with a ready-made essence. He builds himself. With each gesture, he is sculpting the person he wishes to be. And the man, like any human being, lives by a project of being. This means that he is constantly choosing, even without full awareness, the kind of man he wants to inhabit the world. Some men live the seducer's project. They need conquest to feel alive, but don't know what to do with affection once it sets in. Others live the independent project. They love the idea of freedom, but confuse freedom with the absence of bonds. There is also the savior's project, one who only feels useful when he can rescue someone, but is frightened in the face of an autonomous woman. These projects are not accidents. They are existential constructions. They are forms he found to escape the anguish of confronting who he truly is. Because sustaining a project demands consistency, and consistency requires courage. Courage to love with presence. Courage to embrace contradictory desires. Courage to be seen. And here is the most revealing detail. When he treats you incoherently, it's not about you. It's about his internal conflict. He's trying to be two projects at once. He wants the security of a bond, but without giving up the lightness of a life without consequences. He wants to feel desired, but fears the weight of intimacy. He wants to be free, but also recognized. And so he fragments himself. Sartre said, man is what he does. with what was done to him. So yes, perhaps he experienced traumas, poor role models, paternal absences. But what does he do with that now? That is choice. That is project. And that project can be revised, if he has the courage to look at himself. The danger is you trying to adapt to his project, hoping that at some point he will change roles. But roles only change when there is confrontation, when he is forced to look at the stage on which he is performing. And sometimes that confrontation only happens when you stop applauding. Don't seek to understand him as an unfathomable mystery. See him as the author of himself, writing or repeating the same script. The question isn't whether he likes you. The question is, does his project of being have room for the kind of love you want to live? I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't want to hurt you. You deserve someone better. Phrases like these sound full of care. But what happens when, behind the sweetness, there is only one movement? Avoiding responsibility? Sartre called this bad faith, and in the male universe, it can manifest as a refined escape mechanism. Bad faith, in existential philosophy, is the act of lying to oneself. It's not a conscious lie, like someone hiding something on purpose. It's more subtle and more dangerous. It's when the subject believes in his own denial, when he says, "I don't know what I want," but in reality has already chosen not to choose. Bad faith is that elaborate self-deception that protects him from the anguish of positioning himself in the world. Many men resort to bad faith because it offers a comfort zone. They can live half relationships, maintain ambiguous bonds, and still sleep peacefully with the idea that they're not doing anything wrong. After all, they were honest, right? They said they were confused. But Sartre forces us to go beyond the surface. He would say, omission is a choice. Ambiguity is also an act. This kind of bad faith can disguise itself as sensitivity. The man who fears commitment can seem profound. He reflects, hesitates, questions everything, but deep down, he's running away, running from the freedom to choose, because choosing is to renounce other possibilities, and that frightens. Behind the apparent indecision, there is often a clarity that doesn't dare speak. He knows he doesn't want a commitment with you, but doesn't want to lose you either. He knows he's not emotionally available, but wants to maintain the comfort of your affection. He knows he won't change, but needs to keep the illusion that he might one day. Bad faith also manifests through social roles. He convinces himself that men are just like that. They don't know how to deal with feelings. They're slow to mature, as if that were essence, not choice. Sartre denies the idea of a fixed essence. For him, man is freedom in action. He is not what happens to him. He is what he decides to do with what happens. And here is the key point. As long as you believe he truly doesn't know, you spare him the responsibility of knowing. You sustain his game of bad faith, and you become responsible too, by maintaining a narrative that absolves him of choice. He pretends not to know, but you feel that he does. In the averted gaze, in the wavering presence, in the promise that never arrives. And that is where your own freedom is born. Realizing that the unspoken also communicates, that silence is also a form of language, and his confusion doesn't have to become a prison for you. Have you ever felt he was one person with you and someone completely different with friends? That there was a man in private, kind, sensitive, present, and another in public, cold, disconnected, even indifferent? That's not contradiction, it's pure Sartre. He is performing his being for others. According to Sartre, we don't exist only as we are for ourselves. We also exist as we appear in the gaze of the other. And it is in this play of mirrors that many men get lost. They shape themselves to expectations. They perform, because to be looked at is to be defined. And there are men who live to uphold different versions of themselves in every mirror they face. With you, he is sweet, because in your gaze he finds a man he might like to be. But with others, he must perform the distant, the strong, the unshakable, because maybe he still feels too fragile to face the nakedness of affection in public. He changes because he cannot bear the weight of the freedom to be a single self. He adapts because he cannot bear the anguish of disappointing any gaze. Being for others can be suffocating when the man doesn't know who he is in himself. He becomes a patchwork quilt of others' gazes, and you start to wonder, which version is true? The answer may be unsettling. Perhaps none. Perhaps he hasn't yet embraced the project of being something solid, and lives only on reactions. This oscillation can also be strategic, a way to never commit to his own desire, because if he is never whole, he can never be fully held responsible. If he changes all the time, no one can demand consistency, and so he maintains the freedom of the stage, without having to face the truth backstage. Sartre said, "We are free to choose who we want to be, but that freedom exposes us. The gaze of the other can freeze us, can turn us into objects, and there are men who protect themselves from that by living as walking mirrors, always reflecting the desire of others, never revealing their own. The question that remains is, who is he when no one is looking? And even more, who do you become trying to keep up with those versions? Because maybe the problem isn't that he changes with you, but that you need to adapt to each change. And in that process, you start to forget yourself. You're not here to be another mirror. You're here to see, with depth, with presence, with lucidity. And seeing requires courage, because when you see beyond the performance, he feels naked, and not every man is ready to be seen. He doesn't answer you for hours. He cancels last-minute plans. He never includes you in weekend plans. He might even say he's forgetful, that time flies, that life is busy. But Sartre invites us to pause. Routine doesn't just happen. Routine is a choice. A constant act of reaffirming an existential project. Every absence is a decision. Every silence, an affirmation of what one chooses to prioritize. And as hard as it is to accept, it's also liberating, because it gives you back the power to interpret the signs not as chance, but as language. A man who never introduces you to friends is choosing to preserve his social life as a separate space, one you do not enter. A man who disappears when you grow emotionally close is choosing distance as a safety zone. A man who never defines what you are is choosing the comfort of not committing to any narrative, to avoid having to sustain any promise. Sartre would say there is no neutrality in existence. Even what seems like doing nothing is a form of doing something. Not acting is acting. Not deciding is deciding not to decide. And this is one of the most provocative points of existentialism. We are responsible even for our passivity, because by avoiding confrontation, we are choosing to avoid. And that choice has consequences. Many men live as if they are being carried by the current. They wake up, work, live lukewarm relationships, and think they are simply going with the flow. But that flow is made of micro-decisions, of maintained habits, neglected affections, postponed feelings. Every "I don't know" hides an "I don't want to know right now." Every "we'll see" hides an "I don't want to see right now." And while he lives in this suspension, perhaps you are there, trying to understand if the problem is yours, trying to be lighter, more understanding, more patient. But do you really need to adapt to his routine, or recognize that that routine is the clearest language about the place he's willing to give you? Sartre reminds us that freedom is always in situation. This means context matters, but does not determine. He may indeed be tired. He may have traumas and responsibilities, but the way he organizes time, affection, presence, that is freedom embodied. And what he does with that freedom tells you exactly where you stand in this story. Nothing he does is neutral. Nothing he avoids is mere chance. He is speaking through actions. And perhaps, without saying a single word, he has already answered you fully. Maybe he tells you he's afraid of getting hurt, that relationships are complicated, that he's suffered a lot and prefers to go slowly. It may even sound mature, caring. But often what lies behind those words is not caution, it's fear of freedom. Sartre asserted, "We are condemned to be free." The phrase terrifies, but it's the foundation of his entire philosophy. There is no essence, no destiny, no excuse, only choices, and that applies to love as well. To love someone is to choose, repeatedly, to give up the comfort of indecision, to put oneself at risk, and it's precisely there that many men pull back. The fear of freedom in this context is not just fear of surrender. It's fear of becoming responsible for something real. Because in love, there is nowhere to hide. When he draws near to you, he feels called to assume an identity, to become someone who must sustain presence, word, affection. And that is terrifying for someone still performing the role of ambiguity. There are men who desire affection but cannot bear what it demands. They desire to be loved but do not want the responsibility that love imposes. Because to love is not just to feel, it is to choose to continue even when euphoria passes, when routine arrives, when the other confronts parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. Sartre speaks of anguish as a direct reaction to freedom. When a man feels he is facing something profound, a love that invites transformation, he can panic. Anguish appears not because he doesn't love you, but because by loving you, he realizes he can no longer hide behind the mask of casualness. The game is over, and he must show himself whole. That's why some men disappear just when everything is going well. It's not that they lost interest. It's that they began to feel the weight of having to be someone new, someone who responds, who sustains, who exists beyond his own bubble. This fear of freedom is the most silent prison many live in. They have autonomy to choose what they want, but live paralyzed. They pretend they feel nothing, rationalize everything, avoid depth, and protect themselves with phrases like, "I don't want to mislead you," when they've been misleading for a long time with gestures, with implicit promises, with affections cast to chance. But love is not chance. It is an act of freedom. And if he isn't willing to choose, he is choosing not to love. To love halfway is not to love. It is to remain in the safe zone of non-choice, where everything is possible, but nothing is real. You deserve someone who doesn't flee from himself, who faces his own anguish and says, "Yes, I'm afraid, but I'm here." Because freedom scares, but it is also the only possible path to truly loving. Have you wondered why he's attracted to certain women and not others? Or why he seems to choose the same pattern of relationship, even if it ends up hurting him in the end? The answer may lie not in chance, nor chemistry, nor some mysterious unconscious pattern. Sartre gives us another, clue. Desire is a mirror, a reflection of each person's project of being. For Sartre, desire is not merely biological or emotional, it is existential. We desire what in some way reaffirms or challenges what we want to become. A man who desires difficult women, for example, may be enacting the conqueror project. He affirms himself by overcoming resistance. Another, who constantly seeks fragile, fleeting relationships, may be trying to preserve his autonomy, his project of never being tamed by any bond. Desire, in this sense, reveals far more than personal tastes. It shows the contours of the project this man created for himself. And here's an uncomfortable truth. When he feels attracted to you, it's not just for who you are. It's also for what you represent within his existential script. You may be the challenge that makes him feel alive. You may be the calm he never had. Or you may be the mirror forcing him to face himself, and that is not always bearable. Some men desire intensely what they are not ready to sustain, because desire reveals what is missing. But embracing that desire requires courage to change. Sartre said we don't desire just a body or a presence. We desire a possibility of being. The other becomes a portal to a version of ourselves we want to reach or avoid. That's why sometimes he comes close with force and then recoils, because you reveal a path he wants, but also scares him. You invite him to be a different man, more present, more integral, more vulnerable. And that clashes with the old project he was sustaining. Perhaps the self-sufficient, the detached, the untouchable. So desire is not random. It has direction. It points to where the subject wants to go, or where he still cannot go. And you may be the mirror of a desire he is not ready to inhabit. He wants you, but he doesn't want himself with you, because him with you demands he renounce the man he has been. And here is the turning point. When he comes close but doesn't stay, maybe it's not about lack of feeling. It's about excess of conflict. He's torn between two projects, what desire reveals and what comfort sustains. You are not an accident in his life. You are a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look at what appears in that reflection. He stops responding, or responds with short, mechanical phrases. You feel he's there but not present. Something goes out without fanfare, without argument. A silence grows between you, and you no longer know if you're waiting, insisting, or only resisting. Sartre would call that anguish, not yours, but his. Many men's silence is not emptiness. It's excess. Excess of internal conflict. Excess of fear of losing themselves. Excess of distance between who they desire to be and who they can sustain. And in that excess, they choose absence. Sartre said anguish is not fear of something specific, but fear of the possible. The terror of realizing we are free, and therefore responsible for everything we are. Silence then appears as escape. Escape from the gaze of the woman who sees him. Escape from the intimacy that demands presence. Escape from the choice that requires consequence. The man who falls silent may be facing nausea, that deep malaise before his own freedom. He realizes he can indeed be a whole man, that he can love, that he can stay. Yet at the same time, he feels the weight of what he'd have to abandon. Old beliefs, old habits, the false security of superficiality. And here's the trap. He is silent not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. He feels invaded by the possibility of change, but has no structure to face it. So he freezes. Sartre called bad faith the effort to flee from the truth of being. And silence, in this context, is one of the most sophisticated forms of bad faith. Because he says, I don't know what I'm feeling. But what he really means is, I don't want to deal with what I'm feeling. You perceive that absence that speaks loudly, that way of still being there, but giving nothing. No words, no plans, no real affection. And the cruelest part, you begin to doubt yourself. You start to wonder if you're too demanding, too sensitive, too intense. But intensity is not the problem. The problem is, he's not ready for the dive you propose, and can't admit it. Silence says everything. It says, I see the depth, but I'm not ready for it. It says, I feel, but I don't want to transform. It says, I hear you, but I don't want to listen to myself. Because deep down, he knows. If he truly listens, he can no longer pretend he doesn't know. The anguish of male emptiness is not absence of affection. It's absence of an assumed project of being. It's the man who hasn't yet chosen who he wants to be, and who uses silences to postpone that moment. But while he postpones his own existence, you don't need to postpone yours. Don't wait for him to speak to validate what you already feel. Silence is a language, and when the other stops talking, you can still choose to listen to yourself. You came into his life, perhaps without grand plans, without rigid expectations, without a manual, but you came, and something changed, not necessarily outwardly, but inside. He began to see himself, to hear himself, to confront himself. Because your gaze is more than attention. It's a mirror. Sartre said we are what the other reveals us to be, that the gaze of the other transforms us into object, reveals us as we are when exposed. And that's why some men fall in love, intensely, and then flee, not because they stopped feeling, but because they couldn't bear being seen. You're not here by chance. The way you listen to him, provoke him, call him to the present, all of that reveals parts of him he had kept dormant. With you, he realizes he must explain himself, justify himself, show himself. And perhaps he still has no structure to sustain that. Your gaze is a summons. It forces him to step off the comfortable role he always played. The self-sufficient, the rational, the untouchable. With you, that role unravels. Because you're not enchanted by the facade. You see the depths. And not every man is prepared for depth. Many live on the surface as a means of survival. They relate without diving in. They charm, but don't involve. They touch, but don't surrender. And so, when they meet someone who sees, they panic. Perhaps you were the first to look at him not as an enigma to solve, but as a being in construction. And that, for someone who never truly felt seen, is brutal. He sees himself and doesn't like what he sees, or he sees something new and doesn't know how to live it. Sartre doesn't offer easy consolation. He says, hell is other people, but also, paradoxically, we are saved by the gaze that reveals us. The gaze of the other can be imprisonment, yes, but it can also be the beginning of freedom, provided we are able to embrace what appears there. Your gaze is not accusation, it's invitation, but to him, it may feel like judgment. Because when someone sees our incoherence, our escapes, our bad faith, we have two options: transform or escape. And many choose escape. They walk out through the door of silence, of absence, of excuse. But the truth is, the discomfort he feels with you is not about you. It's about what you awaken in him. You're here because, in some way, this encounter was necessary. Not because the universe planned it, but because your choices intersected. And in that intersection, something was revealed. The question now is not whether he wants you. It's whether he's ready to sustain what your gaze demands of him. You're not here to save him, nor to complete him. You're here to be yourself, with courage. And that courage already says everything about who you're choosing to be, with or without him. We've reached the point where all masks fall, where silences, comings and goings, ambiguities cease to be mysteries and become what they always were: choices. Because as Sartre reminds us, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. And that applies to him, but above all, applies to you. Perhaps you spent months trying to understand his behavior, trying to interpret messages, justify absences, fit together signals. But what seemed chaos has an invisible order, the order of freedom. Nothing he did was by chance. He may not have full awareness of all his motivations, but he chose. With every curt response, every confused rapprochement, every cowardly silence, he chose. And now, the choice returns to you. The great trap of chance is that it comforts us. It makes us believe there was nothing we could have done, that we were just victims of bad timing, the wrong person, a poorly written story. But Sartre dismantles that consolation. He says, you are free, and therefore, you are responsible for everything you decide to keep. You chose to stay even when he pulled away, chose to believe even when he contradicted himself, chose to insist when everything told you to leave. None of that condemns you. On the contrary, it shows you too have a project, perhaps the project of loving deeply, of transforming, of inspiring. But now it's time to ask, is that project being reciprocated, or is it keeping you from being who you could be? Freedom, says Sartre, is absolute, but it always occurs in situation, and your situation now is clear. He is where he wants to be. You are where you chose to stay. The question is, and tomorrow, what new choice will you make? You don't need signs from the my universe. You don't need his certainties. You only need to recognize that everything he did, or left undone, has already been an answer, and that you have the power to do the same, to respond, to move, to step out of the role of the one who waits, and assume the role of the one who chooses. Nothing happens by chance. Everything happens because someone, consciously or unconsciously, chose. And that applies to the men you attract, to the patterns you repeat, to the silences you accept. But today, you can choose differently. You can choose not to be a mirror of a fragmented project. You can choose to be presence where there is absence. You can choose to be freedom where there is fear. You can finally choose yourself. Because the great truth the universe wants to reveal to you is that the universe doesn't write scripts. You are the one who writes. With every gesture, every word, every boundary, every time you say, I won't accept less than a whole presence. And that choice changes everything.